And President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the review of 368 grazing sites across 25 states in the country. This is to determine the levels of encroachment. The directive followed the recommendations of a committee chaired by the Chief of Staff to the President, Professor Ibrahim Gambari. The committee is to collate from states and confirm the status of all grazing reserves, assess the percentage of available land and those with existing encroachment complications for case-by-case resolution. It will also make recommendations for gazetting of ungazetted grazing reserves and create a database of national cattle herders and ensure that grazing reserves are well communicated to all stakeholders. President Buhari wants the assignment undertaken with dispatch to bring more understanding on the grazing reserves and implementation. Members of the committee include Kebbi State Governor and Vice Chairman, National Food Security Council, Abubakar Bagudu, Ebonyi State Governor and Chairman of National Economic Council, Subcommittee for National Livestock Transformation Plan, David Umahi, Minister of Water Resources, Suleiman Adamu, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Sabo Nanono, Minister of Environment, Muhammad Abubakar, and Deputy Chief of Staff, Ade Ipaye. This development comes amid controversy over the grazing reserves as southern governors enact anti-open grazing legislations. For more, we're being joined by a lawyer and public affairs analyst, Librous Oshoma, as well as the Chief Press Secretary to the BENUE State Governor, Terver Akase. Good to have you both, gentlemen, on Newsday.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having us.
That's great. Let's start with you, Librous. We recently were applauding and lauding the Petroleum Industry Act, and now we're faced with this. We're told that we're going to be seeing a review of grazing reserves or grazing routes in 25 states. Is it a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or is it 1 step forward and 2 steps back, or is this merely a pothole that can be circumvented?
Thank you for your question. I think it's a pothole that should be filled, not even circumvented. We're talking about grazing routes and grazing reserve of a 1965 Gazette. And one would wonder that as at 1965, when that Gazette was enacted, or the document was gazetted, the Land Use Act was not in place as at that time. And then secondly, if you look at the proviso to the said Gazette, it did recommend in that same Gazette that the ultimate aim of the Gazette was to encourage ranching at that time, which was fast becoming the modern way of rearing cattle. And I do not think that, considering the provisions of our Constitution, which has also put the issue of ranching and cattle rearing squarely under the residual legislative list and not even concurrent, not talk of exclusive legislative list, it should be the problem or the prerogative of Mr. President now to begin to discuss grazing reserve and grazing route. Already, even before that pronouncement, some northern states like Bauchi State, Kebbi State, Borno State, excluding Niger State, because Niger State has insisted that ranching was better and they were going to encourage ranching. Even in Ekiti recently, the governor acquired a massive land, imported cows for ranching. And so I do not really think that this is the time for us to be waking up a horse that should have been dead long ago.
All right. Thank you for that. Terver Akase, thank you for joining us. So, quick question for you. We know that Benue State has an anti-open grazing law. How will this affect? Which one supersedes the other one? How will these gazetting routes, how will it play out?
Thank you for this question. And let me begin by saying that we are deeply shocked and disappointed in the federal government. We expected that if you look at the array of personalities on that committee, you would expect that they will live up the true meaning and perception of an expectation of Nigerians as patrons that they are expected to be. Now, they should have advised Mr. President that grazing reserves or cattle routes, as the case may be, are no longer fashionable and that the entire country, including his home state, Katsina, has come to agree that grazing reserves or cattle routes are no longer feasible. And Nigeria has left that stage and is on to the stage of ranching now. For us in BENUE, we have since 2017, we have left the idea of open grazing. And that's why we hope that the 25 states, remember they didn't disclose the names of those states. We want to believe that BENUE is not among the 25 states, because if they make the mistake of including BENUE on that list, no one will come to this state to map and mark any land for cattle rearing, for grazing reserves. We do not have land for grazing reserves. We have land for ranching, and people, BENUE people who own livestock have been ranching them according to the Open Grazing Prohibition and Ranches Establishment Law of BENUE State 2017. So we wish to put it on record. We wish to let the federal government know that if they made an error of including BENUE on the list of states where lands will be mapped for cattle, for open grazing, whatever name they call it, whether it's grazing reserves
I need to bring
or whatever.
I need to bring in Librous Oshoma at this point so that we can get a broader perspective as well. Librous Oshoma, like Teve mentioned, we have quite an array of people on this committee, so people can't say there wasn't an effort to carry people along. So I want you to try and help us understand what could be the rationale behind this move, especially as we know the president is keen to leave behind a legacy of success. And then could you try and anticipate what could come about? Because it looks like it's a trigger for a face-off if this grazing reserves were to be put forward as valid.
Yeah, I think the reason for this is because we operate a system of government where the president or the leaders can do no wrong. You find people who would, in private, condemn this act and then come out publicly to eulogize it simply because the president had said so. One would have expected that the Attorney General of the Federation, being a seasoned lawyer and a senior advocate of Nigeria, would have looked at the laws, especially the Grazing Gazette that I cited, and then the proviso to that Gazette, vis-a-vis the provisions of the Constitution and the Land Use Act. And so, I do not, now it is very difficult for you to say, because you have this array of people, that they will advise the president in tandem with the provisions of the law. Because in this same country, we've seen a president saying, look, I appoint you as advisors, but it is left for me to accept your advice or not. So you ask yourself the first question, has grazing reserve and route, been a panacea to the incessant problems of herders, farmers crisis, and then also vis-a-vis the banditry up north? As I speak now, the governor of Katsina State had advised these people to take up arms to protect themselves. In Kano State, where the state government also had taken steps to gazetting grazing routes, the governor came out publicly to condemn also the fact that grazing routes are no longer fashionable. In Niger State, the government was very categorical because they are one of the hardest hit states in as far as this clash is concerned. And they came out publicly to say, no, they are encouraging ranching. So one would have expected, like I said, that this should have been, because especially having not solved the problem, the consistent problem. Look at the recent crisis in Jos. Despite the fact also that some part of Jos, they have been earmarked for grazing route. But lastly, on this note, I would want to say that if you're discussing routes that had been reserved since 1965, and then you place it vis-a-vis with the modernity and development that had happened from 1965 till date, a situation where, take Igbogon for example, where houses and palaces have been built on routes that ordinarily were earmarked, because that was the only state, if you look at the Gazette, that's the only state in the southern part of Nigeria that the grazing routes were listed. But then a high court judge in the southern Nigeria, Justice Thompson, did rule that those routes were illegal. And against all of those backdrops.
I have to stop you there. Let's bring in Teve. Okay. Hawa.
All right, Teve, so earlier on you were discussing how BENUE State, if obviously they're against these anti-grazing laws, and if it did come down to it, there would be some sort of a clash. I'm wondering, of the other 25 states, have you speculated which other states in the South might be included in this gazetting law?
How will I know when the federal government has chosen not to disclose the names of the states? We are only speculating, and that's why I had to issue that caution, that if BENUE is included in that list, if BENUE is on that list, then they should know that they are whipping a dead horse. It will not take place. Grazing reserves will not take place in BENUE State. We will resist it. The people will rise against it because they have unanimously given their backing to Governor Samuel Otom to implement, to enforce the ban on open grazing. But by the way, why is the presidency considering open grazing reserves as the only project they have for Nigeria? Is that the only thing they can do for this country? Mr. President was elected popularly in 2015 and in 2019 by the same Nigerians who are in IDP camps in BENUE. Thousands of these people are suffering in the camps. He has not done anything to alleviate the suffering of the people. All that we hear every day is that Mr. President has directed that grazing reserves should be established in all the states. What kind of thing is this? Was this man elected to impose policies on Nigerians? This is democracy, for goodness sake.
On that note, I can see you're very passionate about it, but we're going to have to leave that conversation there and maybe take it up in the days to come. Thank you very much, Terver Akase, Chief Press Secretary to the Governor of BENUE State, and Librous Oshoma, lawyer and public affairs analyst. Thank you for joining us on Newsday.